Within the recruiting process, there's various conversations that happen between the recruiter and the candidate and even the hiring manager. A lot of these are extremely repetitive and mundane, sapping the time of the recruiters and taking them away from more meaningful and worthwhile activities. Like building relationships, talking to hiring managers, or even making job offers. Our guest today is dedicated to bringing the best opportunities to the best talent in chatbots, voice bots, conversational AI, and conversational UX. He's the founder of People Text Consulting and also Bot Jobs, which can be found on the internet at PPLBots or bot-jobs.com. Please welcome to the show, Martyn Redstone.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
So tell me a little bit about your new ventures. You just started a new one called bot-jobs.com. What's that all about?
Yeah, sure. So it's been around for a little while now, but ultimately it's a job board dedicated to jobs within the field of chatbots, conversational AI, voice bots, all those kind of things, really. Ultimately, the reason why I did it was right in the early days of the pandemic when kind of, the whole world went crazy and everyone stopped recruiting and what have you. I looked at what else I could do with my skill set and couldn't really find a place to go to find jobs within that kind of skill set of chatbots and conversational AI and all those kind of things. So because I couldn't find one central place to go, I thought I'll create it myself. So that's what I did. And yeah, it's really interesting. So obviously, it's a booming market right now, the whole kind of chatbot conversational piece outside of the world of recruitment as well. So we've got 500 odd jobs live on there at any one time, all over the world for all different types of companies, ranging from engineering and software development jobs through to sales and marketing, but also some really cool niche jobs in the world of chatbots like conversation designers, UX designers, those kind of things, really. So really interesting.
I saw some new kind of job titles or functionality, if you will, that kind of caught my eye. First, chatbots, everybody knows about chatbots, but what's the difference between a chatbot and a voice bot?
Well, as it says on the tin, basically a chatbot is an automated conversation that you can chat with on your, tap away on your phone or on your computer, ultimately text-based. A voice bot is something you talk to, so I'm not going to say them out loud because they really annoy people when I start saying those smart speaker names out loud.
Starts with an A, starts with an S, starts with a B, you get the
Exactly, yeah, exactly. But so that's kind of what your voice bots are really. And what we're seeing now is obviously people are used to their smart speakers, but now we're looking at things like contact center AI, where you phone up a call center and you've got a voice IVR that's based on conversational AI. So that's also kind of a voice bot as well, where you can start talking to an automated phone line. So loads going on, really.
All right. So give me an idea of what conversational AI and conversational UX is.
So conversational AI seems to be the most fashionable term that we've seen right now. And people now talk about chatbots and they also talk about conversational AI. But ultimately, they're one and the same thing. A chatbot is basically an automated conversation that happens between a person and a computer. The underlying technology around it can either be something like a decision tree, rules-based chatbot, where you go down this standard, option, next question, option, next input, etc. Or you can have something called conversational AI, which is a stack of a group of technologies that basically all stick together so that you can have a more natural, free-flowing conversation with a chatbot or a voice bot. So, natural language understanding, natural language processing, machine learning, and natural language generation. So understanding what somebody is saying, being able to pull out key intents within the phrase that somebody's typed in or spoken, being able to understand what they mean, and being able to understand how to respond to that. And it takes a lot of programming, a lot of training, a lot of learning, but it makes it for a fantastic experience, basically.
Yeah, really understanding that candidate journey and either what questions they have is really, really important, right? So you really have to get good at mapping out those candidate journeys and what conversations are being asked, because they don't ask the same questions at the top of the funnel that they ask at the bottom of the funnel, right? So a conversational AI or a consultant like you would really help because you've got that experience and I'm sure you've captured thousands and thousands of conversations, right? So,
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that use cases for something like a chatbot become less obvious and also rarer as you go to the bottom of the funnel, because that's when I think that the relationship between a person and a candidate is a lot more important. So the whole point of having something like a chatbot is to automate the more high volume, low value conversations that tend to happen more at the top of the funnel. But absolutely, across thousands, if not millions, of conversations, we're able to then start understanding what we call key intents within a query. So, if somebody comes into a chatbot and it's a conversational AI based chatbot, and they say, "Hey, I'm looking for an administrator job in London," that's where I live. Then first and foremost, hey, it's a greeting. So being able to respond back with a greeting as well, but also being able to pull out those key intents of looking for a job. So they want to search for a job, administrator job. They want to search for administrator job in London location. So you've got journey, which is search, job type, administration, location, London. So it's being able to understand those key intents in a sentence, pull them out, and then understand what to respond. And that's where the UX piece comes in. How do you respond in a conversational way to say, rather than saying, asking them to repeat it again and only capturing the job search, say, okay, well, tell me what you're looking for and where. Saying, okay, so I understand that you're looking for, an administrator job in London, and looking for the bits of information that might be missing. Are you looking for a temporary job? Are you looking for a permanent job, et cetera, et cetera? So you're building up a really good experience that you'd expect to have with a person. So that's what the candidate journey tends to look like at the top of the funnel, is understanding what those key intents are at any point of the conversation, any point of the funnel. But we see more
kind of breakdown. I think we jumped like 15 steps ahead of ourselves. And you and I, we do this all the time, right? Every time we have a conversation, we just
absolutely
right down that path. But it's for the people that don't really understand some of the use cases for a chatbot, right? We're talking about funnels, people coming into the top of the funnel, making it down to the bottom of the funnel, right? But very basically, what are some of the main use cases for a recruitment chatbot?
So the main use cases that we tend to see people using a recruitment chatbot for, and again, it depends on whether it's kind of in-house recruitment or whether it's agency recruitment. But across the board, job search, job discovery, job application, FAQ, management, scheduling are kind of the key ones. But then we also see some really, really interesting ones like database regeneration and reactivation. So being able to, rather than deal with things on the inbound, going back out to your candidate database and regenerating those candidate profiles and having engagement conversations with people already on your database. So those are the key use cases at the top of the funnel that we tend to see.
So let's kind of break that down, right? So one of the first things you said was like, top of the funnel, collect information from candidates. What kind of information are you collecting? Name, address, phone number, resume? Are they going in through an actual job application? You have to break it out of the traditional, here's a text-based job description and there's an apply button, right? That's not really what we're talking about in this case, right? So walk me through just this first use case where collecting information from candidates.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's really important to understand that we need to reimagine the candidate journey and the candidate experience. And unfortunately, we still see nowadays where somebody goes onto a job board or a job site, they have a look at a job, they think, yeah, that looks pretty interesting and suitable, I'll apply for it, and they hit apply. And they are smacked in the face with an 8-page application form. Where they have to create a profile, they have to register, they have to give up their all their details, only to have no response. So, and on the flip side, first of all, that's a terrible candidate experience, but also we still see, I know that there's lots and lots of different challenges going on in the recruitment industry right now, whether it be too little candidates, whether it be too many candidates, not the right candidates, et cetera, et cetera. So what we need to do is reimagine that candidate journey. What do we need to do in order to give the candidate what they need, give the recruiter what they need, and either progress or not progress the candidate down the funnel. So the best thing we can do right at the beginning of this conversation is give some top level screening. So rather than going through the whole, I want to collect every single bit of information to fill my ATS up, let's talk about whether or not you're a relevant candidate first. So let's look at the top level. Do you have the right kind of availability if it's that kind of role? Where are you based? Because is it geographically important for the role? Is it the right kind of salary bracket or rate bracket for you? Do you have the right top level skills and experience? And I suppose that's probably the best thing we can start with on the candidate journey is actually saying, well, hang on a second, before you apply, let's actually have this conversation first and say, are you right for the job? And the difference being between a recruiter and a chatbot can have that 1,000, 100,000, 1,000,000 times a day without breaking a sweat. Whereas a recruiter, if they wanted to pre-screen every single person, they can only talk to about 50 people a day if they wouldn't stop, not have a break, and that's all they're doing day in, day out. So I think that's really important.
Kind of important. Let's kind of break this down one more step, right? Because when you're talking about asking screening questions and things like that, and you kind of mentioned, are you trying to screen candidates in? Are you trying to screen candidates out? It really depends on how many candidates you have in that candidate pool, right?
Yeah.
So let's kind of take one specific use case, and then we'll add a use case on top of that, right? So a sub use case, whatever. Right. So the first use case is high volume recruiting, right? We've got a large volume of candidates that we need to screen very quickly. They've got to have 3 to 4 minimum skill set requirements. They have to have a college degree. They have to be able to lift 50 pounds. They have to be able to work a night shift, and they have to have some kind of certification. Just kind of arbitrarily throwing out 4 qualifications, right? You don't want to have a candidate go through a full, half-hour screening or assessments or things like that. Those assessments usually cost additional money. But using a chatbot to screen them for those basic requirements is a really great use case. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, absolutely, especially in the high volume field. Ultimately, in that kind of environment, you shouldn't even need to touch a recruiter because most of the time it's basic level screening that a chatbot could do. If they pass the screening, come along to this location on this date for your induction. Off you go. It should be as simple as that, really. And ultimately, that's the whole point of a chatbot in that kind of process. No, it never is. It never is.
If you can get half of them to pass a drug test or a background check, that's the tough part, right?
Well, absolutely. But yes.
Let's take that use case and we're going to narrow it down a little bit more, and I'm hoping I can maintain my stream of thought here. But you've got the high volume, you've got those 4 minimum skill sets. What I like to do with any kind of chatbots that I recommend clients, set up are, instead of coming from the company's perspective and saying, look, you have to have this, or you must be able to lift 50 pounds, or you have to be able to have this certification, right? What we like to do is set up chatbots from the candidate's perspective and answer questions that they may have, but do it in a way that's very conversational, right? So how we would do it is ask the candidate, hey, this position requires you to be able to lift 50 pounds. You can do that, can't you? Or would you have any problems lifting 50 pounds, right? And then we would give them an example. We're carrying boxes from one end of the warehouse to the other, whatever, I don't know. That's one way to ask. The other way to ask is, do you have any concerns about lifting 50 pounds? Something like that, right? So you have to really tweak that messaging. When you're talking to your clients, do you get into any of that messaging piece also on how you're phrasing these questions?
You've hit the nail on the head on what makes a good chatbot, as far as I'm concerned. So yes, ultimately, the way that you phrase things and the way that you design that conversation is exceptionally important, because what we don't want is just a different version of a form, as in a conversational form, because that's not going to engage anyone and it's not going to give the right level of experience.
Yeah,
so yes,
if you use a form as a chatbot, you basically just put every candidate to sleep.
Absolutely.
The whole point is to be like interactive and conversational, not just I could have filled this out in 10 seconds.
Yeah,
If there
absolutely.
was a better way, you should be using that way, not this way.
Absolutely. And also, you've got to ultimately think this is representing you, your brand, et cetera, et cetera. And therefore, if I was to have a conversation on the telephone with this candidate, how would I talk? I wouldn't just talk, can you lift 50 pounds? Can you do this? Can you do that? I'd say exactly like you said, look, this role requires you to pick up boxes and take them from one end of the warehouse to the other. Those boxes on average are about 50 pounds. Is that something you're comfortable with? Those kind of things. Absolutely. Absolutely. This is what good conversation design is all about. It's something that I spend the vast majority of my time reiterating to people who build chatbots. And I'll give you a great example. I said to somebody the other day, when you've got a new website, do you leave it up to somebody in your IT department to build the website? No, because they're technical people. They're not around. They're not experts when it comes to user experience and all those kind of things. And it's the same thing with chatbots. Do you leave somebody to build that chatbot who doesn't understand what good conversational experience is? No. You deal with somebody like myself who has spent many years building chatbots, who have got and this is the new jobs of the future. Got certifications in conversation design, those kind of things. So it's a skill that people have nowadays, how to design a good conversation.
Yeah, and I think one of the critical aspects, and I used to teach this in recruiting all the time, is you just don't call a candidate up and have a conversation. Never, ever, ever just call a candidate up. You need to have an objective for that call. What is the outcome that you're looking for when you hang up the phone? Are you looking to get them interested in a position and then book a full interview? Are you looking to schedule an interview with a hiring manager? Are you looking to get a resume? Or are you looking to, get referrals? I only recommend that when you're having these conversations, you have one objective or one call to action. If you CTA, if you want to use politically correct marketing terms, right? And the same kind of thing happens with chatbots. They wind up having so many objectives. Well, we want to get them qualified for the job, and we want to have them this, and you wind up having too many layers and too many calls to action, and you just created, instead of like a nice little 1.5 foot hurdle, 1 meter hurdle, whatever you want, you just created a wall that they have to scale over just to get into an application process. It'd be a lot better, instead of having a 6 meter wall, is just to have, a half-meter wall, 12 times or whatever the math is, right? So it's a lot better to do that than it is to have one 12-foot meter wall.
Absolutely. And no, I get it. The sentiment's quite right. It's exactly right. When you're designing a chatbot conversation, always start with the objective and work your way backwards. You can allow for people to go off on a tangent, but using good conversation design, bring them back in, not just have a canned answer of, sorry, I don't understand that, please try again. Through that conversation, bring them back onto subject, take them down that path so that you meet those objectives. And actually, it's part and parcel of good chatbot analytics and review processes where we see how many people have actually met that objective. It's exactly the same with marketing and looking at kind of Google Analytics and things like that, where we look at whether people have converted and hit the objectives and all those kind of things.
Tag manager, the bane of my existence.
But it's exactly the same. Have they met their objective of going through that experience and coming out the other end? And did they enjoy that experience as well? And that's really, really important. But like you said, make those hurdles short and numerous, because also at each stage, allow them the opportunity to deselect themselves as well. Do the recruiter's job for you. Like we said, can you lift 50 pounds? Great. But, talking a little bit more about it, saying this is your expectation, because somebody can just lift 50 pounds and, hoik it up onto a shelf, but can they lift the 50 pounds and walk up and down a warehouse with it? So you're giving them a little bit more information so that they can make that decision on your behalf as well. But short and sweet, like I said, nobody wants to be hit in the face with an 8-page application form where they have to give over their mother's maiden name and their cat's brother's name and all those kind of things just to register to actually apply. Short and sweet does the job every time.
So how do you control the recruiting channels and where that traffic goes, right? So you've got all these channels sending, your website traffic. Hopefully you've got your spigots turned on and you've got job board traffic and social media traffic, and you're driving things from email campaigns and text message campaigns or whatever, right? You're driving traffic. And ultimately, that chatbot is going to be tied to a page on your hopefully career website, or a group of pages, or perhaps a funnel. So how do you decide where this chatbot resides?
That's a really good question. And actually, we can dispel a bit of a myth with that question, because ultimately, I always, when I'm working with people, I look at those channels first. So one of the big mistakes people do is they go out and they buy chatbot technology. They go out to a vendor off the shelf and they'll put it on their website, and then they'll think about it then. I start with, what channels are you engaging on? And actually, the vast majority of those channels, you can have a chatbot within that channel. And I think that's really important, is that you're then going where the candidate is, rather than trying to bring the candidate to the chatbot. You can have a chatbot on SMS. You can have a chatbot on Facebook Messenger, on Instagram, on your web, on your mobile, on WhatsApp, on a maybe a job board's a bit difficult because it's a third party, but URL kind of mapping on that apply button, bringing them to where the chatbot is.
That's where the technology kind of gets lost, right? Because now you're responsible for setting up conversations for a Facebook chatbot, an Instagram chatbot, and now you've got a chatbot on your website. And you're solving so many different use cases at different stages and the different conversations. This is where the technology fails, I think. That and you're never going to have one solution, because Facebook isn't going to let you put your chatbot on their channel. You can drive it to your own chatbot, right? And you've got ManyChat and Drift and 1,000 other ones out there, right? But how do you decide where you should be implementing your first chatbot? Because understand, there is no one chatbot, right? Most likely you're going to have multiple chatbot channels, if you will.
Well, yes and no. So it depends. There is technology out there nowadays where you can have one conversation that you design centrally, and you can turn on different channels that it's available on. So you can actually do that. Granted, that's kind of enterprise level technology, to be honest with you. But yes, you can now do that, because if we think about, if we move away from recruitment for a second, actually think, where else do people engage with businesses, retail, customer service, et cetera, that's happening now in those environments where I can engage with my mobile phone provider on their website, on WhatsApp, on their app, on Facebook, et cetera, and it's all being managed by the same by the same engine. But they're just turning on different channels depending on where their consumers are residing, basically. So I think that what we tend to do is, most ATS nowadays can actually tell you where the source of applicant comes from. So what we tend to do is look at where the vast majority of that. There's no point in designing a chatbot where you only got maybe 1 or 2% of applicants coming from. But if you're hitting 80-90% of all of your applicants, then it tends to be usually the standard places. And actually, nowadays, like I said, there is technology where you can turn on multiple different channels to have the same conversation. And it's all coming back into the same data storage as well, which is lovely. But if you are, and this is the challenge. If you then go out and you say, okay, I'm going to go out, I'm going to get ManyChat because it's $50 a month, or I'm going to go out to Drift and because it's $100 a month, and you're going to buy that, you're limited to that technology. And so that's why I start at the end and say, what's your objective? What channels? What kind of conversation? What kind of media do you want? Because again, some of those technologies are limited in the type of engagement that you can have with somebody. And so we map it all in to say, okay, well, here's what we think that needs to happen. And granted, like I said, some of this technology is enterprise level only. And it's not, the Drift and the ManyChat, which is just buying an off-the-shelf SaaS solution. but it can be done. If you are limiting yourself to something like ManyChat or Drift or something, then there's still a lot of options and some fantastic ones. But you just have to go where the vast majority of your candidates are. Go to them, and that's the whole point of chatbots. And giving candidates or consumers a bit more agency in how they engage with you, engage on their terms at a place of their liking, at a time of their liking.
So we also had another use case that we kind of glossed over, and I'm going to go back to this, but asking screening questions about candidates' experience, knowledge, and skill sets, right? So once these candidates answer the question, and there's a couple different ways. They could type in an answer, they could push a button and click a yes or no, which is kind of rudimentary, but you could also have a list of qualifications, and they could click and highlight the ones that they have access to or have experience with, right? Is there a best way to start collecting this data?
Again, it depends on your objectives of that conversation. If that objective of your conversation is collect the data and then a human's going to make that decision, then yeah, I mean, a mixture of all of the above. If it is a simple, do you hold a driving license, yes or no, then have a yes or no button, because you're not giving people too many options, because that right there is 105 options that somebody has to go through. Every time they want to type, they're looking at 105 different keys and thinking, what do I click next? I know it sounds ridiculous, but that's what happens in the brain. So being able to say to somebody, do you have a driving license, yes or no, is a perfect way to collect their information. You may then want them to, on their phone, take a picture of that driving license and upload it as part of that, but that's for later on.
And I was just going to mention this. You really, really have to think about candidate experience. I mean, this is the candidate experience show, right? So if you're going to put somebody through a chatbot, right, and you're going to ask them, hey, do you have a driver's license, yes or no? That's one thing. But asking them for their driver's license number or asking them for a picture of their driver's license is a very, very different thing. I don't have my wallet near me. Now I have to remove myself from my computer, go downstairs, go into the cabinet where get the thing out, go back upstairs, take a picture of it. And that is not a good candidate experience.
No.
Not the initial one, right?
No. So, and that's the point of what's the objective of the conversation. If it's just purely screening, then you just ask them the question, do you have an up-to-date and valid driving license? If it's a registration onboarding conversation and you need that information, then I would expect you to set those expectations either pre-chatbot engagement on an email, text message, etc., or right at the beginning of the chatbot conversation. We've done it before, which is, by the way, during this conversation, we're going to ask you for this, and this. Feel free to go away, get it all ready, and come back when you're ready. There is technology out there used within the recruitment process where you can ask more in-depth questions around some of this experience. Somebody, tell me about a time when you've done this, etc., etc. And you can have people you with answers on a chatbot, around that. The back-end technology is of a form of natural language processing, which allows you to do some kind of linguistic analysis around what they're saying. Does it match requirements for the role? What kind of a mood is that person in? What kind of a personality does that person have? And that stuff's out there being used by people. So it's a chatbot do some really, really in-depth initial screening and assessments, really automating that and scoring somebody against the requirements of the role. So for a high volume hiring perspective, that's gold, absolute gold.
For anybody in the audience that doesn't understand what NLP is, machine learning and stuff like that, can we just give brief, like 1 or 2 sentence, what is, I know it's very complex, but what is NLP, right?
The NLP stands for natural language processing. So it's exactly that. It's asking a machine to process the natural way that somebody is speaking or typing or chatting. So that's NLP in a simplistic way. Machine learning, again, is how a machine learns. And there's 2 different ways that a machine tends to learn. It's either called supervised or unsupervised. The unsupervised stuff is feeding it with tons of data from Reddit and Twitter and all those kind of things, and allowing a machine to understand how people interact. That's where you see examples where Microsoft bots turn into neo-Nazis and things like that. And unfortunately, because they're learning from the cesspit of humanity on Twitter and Reddit and places like that. But Then you've got supervised learning, which is exactly what it sounds like, where you're supervising how the machine learns. The machine didn't understand how to respond to this input, so you're going to train it how to respond to that input. So that's how it's learning through supervision. That's my preferred way of training a chatbot, is supervised machine learning. Yeah,
They got feedback loops and things like that. If they answer
absolutely.
this, then do this. If you did not, they answer this way, answer that way. So it gives a feedback loop, and it's constantly evolving, if you will, right?
Well, absolutely. There's a very simple example to give. Is there are a bazillion different ways of saying hello. Yeah. So if you go to a chatbot and you say hello, but you say hi, howdy, hey, ahoy, hoy, ahoy there, whatever, ciao, all those kind of things. Exactly. And that happens. You want to make sure that the chatbot knows how to respond to that. It wants to know that that's a greeting and respond in kind. So when you first create a chatbot that's conversational AI based, you say, all of these different words and ways that people are going to say hello. And then on a regular basis, you're reviewing the chatbot, you're reviewing conversation logs, you're going, oh, it didn't understand that. I'm going to now add that word into the list to say, this is another way of saying hello. So it knows with that hello intent, I'm going to respond in one of these different ways. So that's a simple way of showing how supervised learning works for chatbots.
Yeah, and there's lots of ways that people try to break chatbots, right? So
I do it all the time.
Right, yes. Like instead of saying hi or ciao or hello, they'll say may the force be with you or something, or F off or whatever, right? So they try and trick it into not responding the way it's supposed to be responding, right? Break its programming, if you will.
Exactly. So, I try and do it all the time. It's fun, but at the same time, it shows whether you've thought about it. So, one of the top questions that's asked for a chatbot is, what's your name or who made you? So even just designing part of the conversation to answer that and then bring them back on delights the user, because they're thinking, I've just tried to trip you up. You knew how to answer that. Fair play to you. It makes a big difference.
Yeah. So a way that NLP was kind of explained to me is like, look, if a computer had to understand grammar and vocabulary, that's one thing, right? But really, NLP takes it to the next level, and the computer starts to understand what the intent of the conversation is. There's lots of words, especially in English, that have double meanings or triple meanings. There, and there. They don't understand the difference between it, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. You can really go down a rabbit hole with NLP, right? Which is why it's so complex, because the English language and most languages are very complex. Understanding human emotion or intent is really what it's all about. So the neat little field. So
it is.
The other way is, besides just taking it to like asking screening questions and their background experience, you can also go into ranking candidates based on certain qualifications or engagement levels. Can you talk about how there's a couple different ways you can rank candidates using chatbots?
Yeah, absolutely. So the simplest way is very binary. So like you said, do they have a driver's license? Yes or no? If yes, score them 1. If no, score them 0. And then, at the end of it, you've got an overall score. It's a very simplistic way. But like I was saying earlier, there's technology out there now that allows you to build a job profile. You can directly input it from your ATS to say, okay, well, we're looking for a maintenance, janitor, something like that. They need good customer service. They need yada yada yada. And so you've now got technology out there that will allow you to ask questions like, tell me a time when you've delivered exceptional customer service. So they'll give a couple of sentences of an answer rather than a yes/no question. And the technology looks at the words that are being used, maps it against various different models around what good customer service looks like, et cetera, and comes out with a score. Now, where it gets really cool is not only ranking those people about how they answered that question and how they matched the role, but also then ranking them against the other candidates that have applied as well. And so, that person might have answered, 2 scores better. So actually, when we look at the rankings, then, this person is, an 8.9 out of 10, but that person who might have looked, an hour earlier, a 9 out of 10 is now dropped down to a 7 out of 10 because there's another person in the mix.
This can be a slippery slope for small or medium-sized businesses enterprise organizations would probably be the best fit for implementing any kind of ranking of candidates or things like that. Would you agree with that, or?
Again, it depends on the use case. So if you're a small business that's doing high volume hiring, absolutely you want to be looking at something like a ranking system, because you won't have the manpower to do it yourself if you're a smaller business, but just doing some high volume hiring. And there's technology out there that you can get up and running in a matter of hours, not even, that can do this for you. But yeah, absolutely. You know, I think that what we tend to see is smaller businesses utilizing some very binary systems where they can output the data into a spreadsheet and do the ranking themselves, basically.
So a lot of companies think, or a lot of recruiters have said, well, I'm never going to get replaced by a chatbot, things like that. What are kind of your perspectives on, are we actually going to replace recruiters with any kind of chatbot technology?
I don't think we're going to replace recruiters. We'll replace parts of the process that are absolutely no value to a recruiter. And I think that's the most important thing that we need to remember, is that automation in any form isn't about replacing people. It's about augmenting processes, augmenting people, and freeing them up from very mundane, repetitive tasks, or in this case, mundane, repetitive conversations. I don't think anyone out there wants to replace recruiters. They want to make their lives easier, give them more time back in the day, make them more productive.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. Right? I mean, there are certain things that computers just cannot do right now, maybe 10 years from now, 15 years from now, with the way that blockchain and AI and everything else is going. But ultimately, the recruiter is still going to build that relationship with that person, make job offers, things like that. So
exactly,
there might be some use cases where that's not happening. But all right,
absolutely. Which I'll take you back to the original piece of, the further down the funnel you get, the less need for a chatbot there should be, as far as I'm concerned.
Look at that. You wrapped the whole thing up.
There we go.
Martyn, fantastic conversation. I could talk about chatbots for at least another hour or so, but we've got a short limited time. So
absolutely.
Any last kind of thoughts here, or where can people get in touch with you?
Absolutely. So first of all, been a fantastic conversation. You and I can geek out over this stuff all the time, I know. But if you want to find out more, you can get me at pplbots.com, pplbots.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm always on there doing something silly. But yeah, hit me up on my website or via LinkedIn.
All right. Everybody, thank you so much. Make it a great day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks all.